Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our continuing webinar series. My name is Doug Lakey, and I'm the Development Director at Food and Water Watch and for our political arm, Food and Water Action. I'm here with Michele Merkel, who's the Director of our Advocacy programs, to talk about our climate future and the fight right now to protect our home. I'm really excited to be here with Michele because she has a big brain and she wears a lot of different hats here at Food and Water Watch. She's an experienced environmental lawyer, a policy expert, and someone who spent her life fighting for environmental and economic justice. I'm sure you know there's a ton of stuff going on in the news around climate change, so I can't think of a better person to give you an overview about what the state of debate is right now and what your support has made possible that's happening on the ground around the country. And it really is because of people like you that Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action are leaders in the movement to stop climate change. You probably know that we generate a lot of information and resources to mobilize people around campaigns to ban fracking, to protect our food and our water and a livable climate. But this webinar series is something we offer especially for people like you who make all of our work happen. And since we don't take any government or corporate funding, it really is you who keep the lights on and make sure that Michele and I can be here to do things like this and to fight for the future we all want. You know, I bet you feel like me that it's kind of overwhelming at times. These are really, it feels like a really dark time, but I mean, there's really some good news to share too, and that's what keeps us coming to work every day. And the fact is that all the good news is that the work that you've done, the petitions you've signed, the events you've attended, the phone calls you've made, and the money you've donated has really helped to build a movement of people that is finally resulting in some political pressure on Congress and a long needed discussion in the media about the problems we're facing. And really it feels for the first time that we're starting to have a debate around big solutions that are in keeping with the scale of the problems we face. Michele's going to talk about all of that. She's about 10 to 12 minute presentation, but we really want to hear from you. So please share your thoughts. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Just click that button, enter your questions and hit send. And in the last 10 minutes or so of our presentation, we'll try to get to all those questions. We're going to be on the screen for about a half an hour, and we're going to try to wrap it up. But I know that I can talk long and Michele can talk long too. So we'll really try to keep to that, but at the same time, we want to get to your questions. So thank you again for being here. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Michele. So Michele.
Thank you so much, Doug. And good evening, everyone. I also want to thank you for joining us tonight and for your really generous contributions. As Doug mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the latest climate science and about the movement that you've been so instrumental in growing to fight climate change, including some of our really big victories that we've had just in the first 3 months of 2019. But first, I am going to share my screen so I can show you a few slides. All right, here we go. So let's recap some of the climate science findings from just this past year. Last October, the International Panel on Climate Change warned that nations are not acting quickly enough to aggressively cut greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, if we don't dramatically cut them, all of civilization will see permanent and irreversible damage as early as 2030. But we don't need this IPCC report to understand the urgency because the alarming effects of climate change are already all around us. Just last year, California saw some of the most lethal and largest wildfires on record. Just one of the fires killed 86 people in Northern California, destroyed over 18,000 buildings. And these fires are exacerbated by the state's lack of rain because massive portions of the state are in the midst of a long-term drought, which is also in part climate related. And as California burned, the Arctic melted, causing rising sea levels, which in turn could mean that coastal cities like New York, Miami, LA, all of these cities could be underwater perhaps as soon as 2100. And globally, the refugee crisis is also intensifying. The World Bank issued a report this past year in March, concluding that by 2050, global water shortages, crop failures, and rising sea levels could displace some 143 million people. That's about half of the population of the United States. I also read an article this morning about a report that's coming out soon that shows that tens of thousands of species are at high risk of extinction, and countries are using nature at the rate that far exceeds its ability to renew itself. So we only really have a small window, a little more than a decade, to make dramatic transition. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to require the same scale as the national response to the Great Depression and the mobilization for World War II. We need to advance bold and ambitious policy proposals and organize to make them happen. But Doug shared the good news, which is we're finally beginning to have the debate and conversation around solutions that are in keeping with the scale of the problem. And these conversations are being framed as a Green New Deal. This is a bold concept that's captured the imagination of many people. Last year, youth group Sunrise leaders put this term Green New Deal on the map and really changed the conversation around climate policy in this country. Recently, Senator Markey and Representative Ocasio-Cortez have introduced a resolution calling for a Green New Deal. While we support the scale of the transformation envisioned by the resolution, and we fully support a lot of its language talking about jobs and investment, its failure to address fossil fuels is a significant omission. So as Winona said, any legislation, or in this case a resolution, that does not explicitly address the urgent need to keep fossil fuels in the ground is insufficient. So in January of this year, we spearheaded a letter with a couple of allies that over 600 organizations support, and it pretty much lays out the basic elements for any national climate legislation. So what must be part of any Green New Deal for Food and Water Watch to support it? First, we need a rapid transformation to 100% renewable electricity and transportation in line with science. In 2015, Food and Water Watch in Paris was the first group to call for 100% renewable energy transition by 2035. And then in the last Congress, we incorporated this timeline in the Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future Act, which was introduced by Tulsi Gabbard. To date, it still is the most aggressive piece of climate legislation ever introduced. It coupled a quick, fair, and just transition to 100% renewable energy with a moratorium on the expansion of fossil fuels, among other things. So any Green New Deal must be at least as ambitious as the OFF Act, but we know we need to also ramp up energy efficiency, update our electricity grid to incorporate battery storage and distributed energy systems. Second, we need to limit what is considered renewable energy sources that are actually clean and renewable, which seems really obvious, but there's really a lot of clean energy packages that consider polluting sources like biomass or natural gas from factory farms, nuclear power, incineration, to be clean or renewable. And we reject these dirty and dangerous energy sources, and so must any Green New Deal. Third, we need to stop new fossil fuel projects and exports and subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. The science is clear that fossil fuels must be kept in the ground. If we're going to ignore the supply side, we're never going to meet our renewable energy needs. We need to stop selling off or leasing publicly owned lands to fossil fuel producers. We need to stop approving new infrastructure projects. We need to end exports of fossil fuels, and we need to immediately end the massive and irrational subsidies that we're providing to fossil fuel and other dirty energy companies, both domestically and overseas. And fourth, we need to rely on mandates and regulation, not market-based approaches. You might have heard of market measures like carbon taxes or cap and trade that rely on setting price signals, but this isn't going to cut it. We know that study after study show that these type of pricing and trading schemes are really ineffective at reducing emissions. And worse yet, creating a climate plan that relies on dirty fossil fuel production, continuing or even expanding it in frontline communities to fund the transition to renewable energy is immoral and treats these communities as sacrifice zones. We don't want any carbon pricing or any market-based scheme in a Green New Deal. And along the same lines, we need to prioritize justice and investment in most impacted communities and a just transition for workers. For renewable energy transition to be successful, it must work for everyone. So that means we must transition to a 100% clean energy system by transitioning workers from jobs in the fossil fuel industry to living wage union jobs that support energy efficiency and the development of the renewable energy system that we need. This will include things like job training, relocation assistance, and a commitment that environmental justice communities are not going to be sacrifice zones, but protected in a national energy plan like everybody else. We are working on a comprehensive piece of climate legislation now with Senator Bernie Sanders and others, and we hope to get this introduced in the next couple months. But getting the bill introduced will only be the first step in what will undoubtedly be a hard-fought battle. But if you think it's hopeless, I'm here to say it's not. As Doug mentioned, we banned fracking in New York when everyone said it was impossible, but we dug in, we worked with people on the ground who knew the only answer was to ban fracking. And together we created the political space that it became possible. And despite the power of Trump and his political allies, a lot of important decisions around energy are being made at the state and local level where they have less power and influence in places where we can win right now. And as we learn, these wins at the local and state level will eventually also move federal policy. So let's talk about some of the really big wins we've had just in the first 3 months of 2019. First, we were the first group to call for a ban on fracking in 2011, a national ban. We helped to ban fracking in New York in 2014, led efforts in Maryland in 2017 to ban fracking. And most recently, we pushed the Florida Governor DeSantis, who announced in January via executive order that he's initiating the process to ban fracking in the state. This is very exciting. We're now working on legislation to provide the roadmap for doing that. But we really bird dogged him during the campaign. We had an action outside of his inauguration to force him to stick to his promise he made, and he did it. And Republican governor-led states like Maryland and Florida really demonstrate that there's a bipartisan movement across this country to ban dangerous and outdated dirty energy practices. In addition to banning fracking, we also fight infrastructure that supports fossil fuel extraction, including pipelines. So this is Ginny that you see on the screen. She lives in Pennsylvania. The pipeline you see next to her is from an extension of the Mariner East 2 pipeline. The company, Energy Transfer Partners, that is financing all of this, told her that you'll never even know we're here. And then they started clearing land near her homes, near senior living facilities, near playgrounds. They hit an aquifer underneath a neighborhood from their drilling, destroying private wells that residents rely on for drinking and cooking and bathing. There were sinkholes, and in a nearby county, there was even a pipeline explosion destroying a home. And you can see from this photo that Ginny and her neighbors are clearly within the blast zone. So we have worked alongside Ginny and others in the community to bird dog elected officials. And on February 11th of this year, Governor Wolf ordered his environmental agency to suspend review of all permits for Energy Transfer Partners, which includes 27 outstanding permit approvals for the Mariner East 2 pipeline. Additionally, recent criminal probes were launched by 2 district attorneys, and the Pennsylvania Attorney General has joined those investigations. So this is exciting news because Pennsylvania has been ground zero for fracking, and hopefully this is the beginning of ending this pipeline infrastructure build out. And finally, we had a really big win in LA this year. In 2016, the LA City Council passed a motion requiring it to study a 100% renewable energy future. And we released our own report in 2018 and our own analysis showing that LA could stop rebuilding its gas plants and transition to 100% renewable energy by 2030 for less money than continuing to rely on fossil fuels. And on February 12th of this year, in this picture, as you can see, Mayor Garcetti announced his decision to scrap the plans to rebuild these 3 gas power plants in favor of replacing aging turbines with renewable energy. This is what the Green New Deal looks like in communities. Interestingly, before his big announcement, his office called one of our lead organizers, indicating that we're more than at the table. They want to stand beside us. They're making decisions to shift to renewable energy based on our pressure and our allies' pressure. And then excitingly, last week, Mayor Garcetti also decided to revoke an oil and gas lease in an LA neighborhood. And the drill site, which is located across the street from an apartment and homes, when it was in operation, neighbors reported chronic illnesses, headaches, nosebleeds, asthma. They've been fighting for years to get the drilling operation permanently shut down, and now they have won. So in addition to these really important wins, I'm also really inspired by younger Americans who are now changing the game by calling for dramatic action and demanding attention in a way that's really affecting decisions of elected officials. Youth-led efforts like the Sunrise Movement, the Youth Climate Strike, and a lawsuit called Juliana versus the United States. So I mentioned Sunrise earlier. They've, in support of the resolution, have amassed over 100 co-sponsors in the House and Senate, including most of the Democratic presidential hopefuls. The Youth Climate Strike held protests across the globe last week in 98 countries. The 400 events held in the United States were done in part with the leadership of a 13-year-old young girl. This is Zachary Bennett Weltman that you see in the photo, who spoke at an event last weekend. He is the son of one of our wonderful organizers in New York, Eric Weltman. And then one of the most impactful cases working its way through the federal court system is Juliana versus the United States. It was filed in 2015 on behalf of 21 children, that one of the lead plaintiffs is seen in this photo, to force the government to come up with a plan that would wean the country off of fossil fuels. And no one thought that this lawsuit would go anywhere, but since its filing, the Supreme Court has rejected 2 government motions to delay or terminate the case. And the legal proceedings have really forced the government to make some startling admissions in court filings about climate change, and equally important, a federal judge in denying the government's motion to dismiss the case concluded that and recognized a a constitutional right to a stable climate. This is super important finding and something that we can use in future litigation and in other forums. We have been asked during the course of the litigation to submit briefs in support of this case, and we've been really grateful to be a part of it. So we're seeing some really big shifts this year, and 2020 is just around the corner. We're using this time to create political space for even bigger solutions and bigger wins. We were just talking before the webinar about how in 2016 there were no questions asked of presidential candidates about climate change. That's going to be different next year. And so we're going to continue to mobilize people to reclaim their political power, to resist corporate control. And I think I'm feeling hopeful. I think the stakes are still obviously very, very high. It's a fight we must win because it's the only planet we get. I have a 9-year-old daughter, so losing is not an option for her and for future generations. But we know that we can with your support, and we look forward to getting over the finish line with you.
I'm an old guy, and I always thought that these issues would not impact me, but I know they're going to impact me in my lifetime. Forget about the lifetimes of my nieces and my nephews and Michelle's children. So, I mean, that we really are in the fight for our lives, and we know that, you know, it's kind of big money against big people. You know, those are really what we're fighting here. And so we know that the only way we're going to get the changes we need to have a sustainable future for our children and grandchildren is by all of us standing together, large groups of people everywhere coming together to fight for the change we need. And at Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action, that's what we're committed to do. And because of your support, we're able to do that. So I just want to thank you again for all of that. So we've got about 10-15 minutes left, so that's good. We're in time, so we have time to take some questions, and we've got a couple of good ones already. So I would like to encourage you to go ahead and submit your question. Again, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button. Just click that, and you'll be able to enter your question, and we'll try to get to it here. So one of the questions someone has asked is that, well, we've talked about energy and climate. What about the food and water issues that Food and Water Watch is known for? You know, so kind of, can you talk a little bit about that, Michelle, how these are all related?
Sure, I'll get it started. You can jump in. Without a livable climate, we can't have safe drinking water. We can't have access to safe and affordable food. And so these are, of course, very important and very related issues to climate change. A couple of things come to mind of things that we're doing. First, we worked with Representative Brenda Lawrence this year from Michigan, and Ro Khanna from California, and Bernie Sanders in the Senate to introduce legislation on February 28th, which is called the Water Act. This is a piece of legislation that we largely wrote. It is a comprehensive solution that creates a $35 billion trust fund for water infrastructure improvements. It'll provide over 1 million jobs. It also requires things like taking out toxics like lead out of drinking water, and has really, for those on private wells, also pretty robust rural assistance programs as well. And so we're excited about that piece of legislation. It is a part of our Green New Deal. On the ag side, there's a couple of things going on.
And I think it's really important for people to understand what a big component of greenhouse gases industrial agriculture is right now. So, I mean, even over and above the harms of factory farming, it's a huge contributor to greenhouse gases. So
absolutely.
Sorry to jump in, but I just wanted
to
sort of make that point.
Yeah, that's true. Well, so the livestock sector alone, that's not even all of agriculture,
right,
contributes about 14.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions originating from human activity. And so there's this really interesting report from Institute on Ag and Trade Policy, for Ag and Trade Policy, that estimates that the top 5 meat and dairy companies produce more greenhouse gas emissions than Shell or BP or Exxon, which is astonishing. And the top 20 produce more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire country of Germany, right? So, and this is just livestock and not all of agriculture. And so clearly you have to have a rapid transition away from the factory farm system as well to appropriately address climate change. We have been talking a long time about shifting away from the industrial model of industrial agriculture. And we launched a campaign last year to ban factory farms. There's a report called The Urgent Case to Ban Factory Farms. It talks about how industrial farming is bad for communities, bad for animals, bad for the environment, bad for climate.
Right.
And then we're working with legislators to incorporate some of our recommendations that report into legislation as well as part of the Green New Deal. And we also had a bill last year that we hope is going to be reintroduced in this Congress, will be reintroduced. It's a merger and moratorium bill that Senator Cory Booker introduced and Representative Pocan from Wisconsin that puts a pause on mergers above a certain dollar amount in the ag sector while there's a really hard look at our antitrust laws, and the legislation calls for recommendations on how we can actually restore a fair and competitive marketplace. Because right now we've got just a handful of companies controlling every aspect of our food system, and so we need to deal with those as well, those monopolies, in order to make the change we need.
Well, and I think this is where everything gets so interesting, because the devil really is in the details and all of these policies, which is why, you know, on top level, they'll say Clean Sky Initiative, but it really depends on what the details of that policy are. And what we've learned at Food and Water Watch is that you've got to break up these big policy initiatives into sort of smaller bite-sized pieces, and you win at the local and state level, and that can drive the conversation. So we saw that in fracking, where when we talked about doing a ban on fracking in New York in 2011, when we first got involved, people were like, "You're crazy. That's not possible. You know, big oil is too powerful." But we looked at the science, we looked at what the needs of the people there were, and we said, well, the only way we can regulate, or the only thing we can do, is ban it. There's no way to regulate this safely. And guess what? When you give people a big goal that they're excited about, they're willing to do the activism, they're willing to be involved over time. And over the course of 3 or 4 years, we were able to actually ban fracking when everyone said we couldn't do it. So we're taking the same lessons learned in fracking and applying them to the factory farm model. Because right now you say, there's no way, how do we grow our food? But there is a way, as long as we have the energy and we have the vision to make it happen. So I think a big aggressive goal like banning factory farming, they're gonna get people in Iowa excited about that, because they're living with it every single day. And so
yeah, and even though we just launched this campaign last year, we had active moratorium legislation in Iowa, in Oregon, we have active campaign in Michigan. So we're on the move. And like with fracking, sometimes we had to accept a moratorium on the way to a ban, but the ultimate goal was ban. We got there, and we know we can get there in the ag space as well.
Right. And we've got, and thank you everybody. I see a bunch of questions now, so thank you so much for asking them. I'm going to pick one of them out, which is, how does the C4 Food and Water Action kind of relate to the C3 Food and Water Watch? And if Michelle doesn't mind, I'm going to jump in first, because I think it doesn't take a lot of complexity to answer that question, which is basically, we know that the way we make our political system work is we hold politicians to account. And we hold them to account for their policy positions, and we keep advocating and get people to help us give pressure. But sometimes it doesn't work. So how do you hold them to account? You vote them out of office. Well, so on the C3 side, Food and Water at Watch, we're all about holding them to account, being on top of the policy details, and making sure that they're doing the right thing. When they don't do the right thing, we need to vote them out, and that's where our C4 Food and Water Action comes in. And really, Food and Water Action and Food and Water Watch, we're kind of unique in this space, because we're the tip of the spear, we're the head of the curve. You know, basically, we're about, you know, doing the things that people need, what the planet needs, what the science demands. When I think Michelle mentioned in New York, when we first got started, we were too extreme. It was too much to ask for. But we found out that when we asked for what people want, and people get excited and be organized, and we were able to win. So thanks to you, in 6 years, we moved the idea of a complete ban on fracking from the literal fringes to now where it's a mainstream policy position. And we see it in the Democratic Party, and we see it on candidates across the board. And now we're going to do the same thing with 100% renewable energy, as we're going to make that our demand, and we're going to build on the leadership so that we have the comprehensive solutions that we really need, that really are embedded in ideas like the Green New Deal and specific legislation like the Water Act. And I think you have some examples from on the ground of some things that we've done that are very similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, Food and Water Action, do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, just talk about some of the campaigns.
Jump in here,
yeah,
sorry.
Sure, sorry.
Interrupting.
We haven't done enough rehearsing.
No, I mean, I just wanted to mention that when you talked about how the C4, how do we leverage that for our C3, right? And I think last year was really the first year that our C4 was active. And and I mentioned the Mariner East 2 pipeline fight earlier in my presentation. And that's a great example where our organizers kind of use the C4 along with the C3 very effectively. So I was just reading articles about this yesterday. There was a recent article from this week where those criminal probes that I mentioned were launched by 2 Republican district attorneys. And the article talked about that they thought that this reflected the continuing threat that the GOP feels in suburban Philadelphia because of all the great organizing work that's been done around these infrastructure fights. And in fact, our organizers did use Food and Water Action, our C4, to help folks influence local elections. And we had some really big wins in suburban Philly. And we also had one of the activists who won a state house seat. And so it was super effective. And I think that's what winning looks like. It's not just about the site fight, right? It's about thinking bigger for your community, the state, the country. And so that was super exciting. We also unseated some folks in Maryland, one of our key Senate committee chairs. Again, no one thought we could do it. Every other environmental group was kind of afraid to touch the race. We went all in, and we were able to unseat her and create space for, you know, an opportunity to move more legislation in the future. So I think that for the first year, even though we're still learning, was really successful, and we had a lot of success in a few targeted areas that we wouldn't have had without the C4 for sure.
Right. I'm just looking over here at some other questions. We have a lot of people asking for information that they can help them in terms of scorecards and counter events. So I would encourage you to look at our website. We will follow up on all these questions individually. I wonder if you want to talk about market-based solutions real quickly, Michele, because I see we get a couple of questions about that. You know, why do we think it's market-based solutions are not the answer, like cap and trade or carbon taxes?
I sort of mentioned that. I mean, carbon taxes and carbon pricing, you keep hearing about that a lot as like the bipartisan type of solution. You know, when we first started learning about carbon tax, the gold standard on Capitol Hill was the British Columbia example. And so we really dug into it. There's a really good report on our website about where we looked at the carbon tax. And we found that, in fact, greenhouse gas emissions did not go down. They actually went up during the life of the tax. There was a little bit of a dip during the economic recession, but then, and they're projected to go even higher. We also are concerned about the regressivity of carbon taxes, right? Because a lot of this, companies will pass those on in the form of higher home heating or gas prices, and lower income families spend a higher percentage of their income on those types of things that they need for everyday living, right? So we think there are better ways of taxing, like financial instruments and things that aren't going to be regressive, but beneficial in raising money for the transition that we need. But also, you know, we're worried about the carbon tax not being a good solution and then preventing us and getting in the way of what we really need, which again is mandate and regulation. And we have laws that have worked that would just require people to reduce pollution by a certain amount by a certain date. That's really what we need, and we don't need. When
we created the EPA in the 70s, we didn't say, oh, here's your cap. We actually said, you can't do this, you can't dump this in the air, you can't dump this in the water, and guess what? That worked. So I mean, there are solutions that we know have worked in the past. We don't need to be playing market games with the place that we live, which is, you know, our home. I don't want to gamble my home on some financial market. I want it to be mandated that we can't pollute in our home. So I think. Yeah,
and I'm concerned about the reliance on the revenue. So in California, the cap and trade program, right, there are studies that show emissions went up in low income communities and communities of color. These market-based schemes generally favor the wealthy, right? And frankly, screw the poor. So, you know, but the governor had his heart set on cap and trade because he wanted it for his pet train project, right? I mean, if you're going to rely on revenue raised from carbon taxes, that means you're okay with continuing fossil fuel extraction and production
and pollution,
right? Because you need the pollution in order to raise the revenue. I mean, that just seems, we don't need it. It's like I said earlier, we think it's immoral. We don't think frontline communities should be sacrifice zones. So it doesn't have any place in our Green New Deal for sure.
So it's 7:29. I want to be respectful of people's time, and I know that we do have some other questions. We are making note of those, and we will get back to individuals that have asked them. We will also have this up on our website, and there'll be more information for you to get involved. So I do want to be respectful of people's times. We said we'd try to cut it to a half hour. So I want to take one more question that I see several people asking in comment, which is really, what can I do as an individual to make a difference? And I think that's a good place to wrap this up, because it's really all about you. So, I mean, I'm going to be really selfish and say the first thing I hope you'll do is continue to support Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action. We can't do any of this work without people like you, and it's going to take all of us fighting together. So please continue supporting us. I would say on a personal level, take action to live, to live your values, and, take action to reduce your carbon footprint, but also recognize, and I'm sure you know, that your individual action, my individual actions are not enough. What we need systemic change, which means policy change. These things didn't happen by accident, and we're not going to get out of them by accident. So it's really about supporting organizations and groups that are fighting for policy change, because that's what we need. And I would also put in some selfish stuff for Food and Water Watch also there, because we have tons of actions happening at the local level, at the state level. We obviously need people standing with us at the national level while we push to make the Green New Deal as green as it needs to be. And as we work to push the Water Act and to ban factory farms and really make all the changes we're talking about. And I guess, thinking of all this as again, as an individual, I'd say stay outraged and stay engaged, but most of all, stay outraged, because we need your anger and we need your focus. We need all of us standing together to fight for what we need, which is to protect our home. And so it's going to take all of us standing together, doing more than we ever thought we could, longer than we ever thought we'd have to, but we do know that we can win because we've seen it already. And so I would just end this saying, fight like you live here, because you do. And that's what we do every day at Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us again. I hope this has been interesting for you, and I hope that you'll share it with your friends, and I hope you'll keep fighting and stay involved. So with that, I think, Michelle, thanks so much.
Thank you. And thanks.
And thanks everybody.
Well.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.